So I live in a block of flats. Not the most modern, but not old by any means. For years, I've had various forms of parasomniac activities. Sleepwalking, talking, sleep paralysis, nightmares, insomnia. But since moving into my new flat, the talking and walking has intensified. When we first moved in, my boyfriend thought he saw a few strange things, but I dismissed these as the flats don't seem old enough to be haunted. A few weeks ago, I had a nightmare about demons and screamed in real life, and in my dream, I flung myself off the bed to escape, and I injured myself on a radiator, which freaked me out quite a bit. But that didn't strike me as haunted, just a bit scary. Now the paranormal. I couldn't sleep one night at all. Was on my phone for a bit until 2:30, when I tried to sleep, which wasn't working. After around an hour, I decided I needed to go pee. If I didn't, I knew that I wouldn't be able to fall asleep, so rather reluctantly, I took myself to the toilet. I upped my phone brightness while trying to avoid looking at the time, because I would have been depressed at all the sleep I was missing, and used it to shine a light so I could see my way. As it was so late and my boyfriend was asleep, I decided to keep the door open, otherwise I'd have had total darkness, which would have been terrifying. So I'm sitting on the toilet with the door about just over an arm's width away from my face, and my light facing away from me. Halfway through peeing, illuminated by my phone, I see the door handle slowly moving down, and I freeze. It jolts back up and repeats slowly again. At this point, I'm trying to make sense of what's happening, when in 4 loud successive motions, the handle goes up and down, quite aggressively. Bearing in mind I'm mid-flow, I stop peeing and jump up and shout, "Fuck off!" and just absolutely Usain Bolt it back to the bedroom. My boyfriend is asleep the whole time. No one else is in our flat, and I just lay in bed completely covered, too squared to close my eyes in case God knows what decides to come back. Needless to say, it was a very restless few hours sleep, and in the morning I had to call my mum just to be able to go back to the bathroom, as I'm absolutely terrified. My boyfriend has seen a few weird things blowing around without wind, and things going missing, but nothing like my experience, and I haven't had anything like that before or since. My boyfriend moved in recently, as we're expecting a baby in May. We've both been sensitive to paranormal occurrences in our life, living in haunted houses or seeing the unexplained, etc. But this is different. I've lived in this apartment for 3 years and felt nothing but peace, aside from having the neighbours from hell for 2 of those years, but nothing paranormal. The air is light and you don't feel anything menacing. In previous homes I've lived in, I could feel a presence, as if someone was there. And as far-fetched as it sounds, I do consider myself somewhat of a clairvoyant. There are several events in my life that I had predicted correctly. It's almost Halloween and things in the house are starting to move around. I don't know if it's because of the veil is thinning, or if it's because my birthday has arrived, or the thing that's been following my boyfriend around his entire life has made its way into my home. Some instances that occurred in the past 3 days. The deodorant in my clear work bag physically lifted up in the bag and dropped. The bag has stayed in the same place for the past 4 days. Washed silverware sitting in the dish rack was heard clinking together. A bottle of cleaning solution that was placed on top of the refrigerator flew down to the ground as my boyfriend walked out of the kitchen. My state passes out candy the Thursday before Halloween, and as I was sitting on my porch in front of my closed door, I heard footsteps shuffle up behind me. I had looked around to see if any kids were walking up and down the street, but it was empty. There was no way and no room for someone to sneak behind me. Several loud knocks were heard just an hour before this was posted. However, I am willing to explain most of these occurrences away with logic. I have 3 dogs and 4 cats who are very reactive to the sounds and presence. For example, my dogs freak out and bark at the neighbourhood raccoons, making their nightly rounds to everyone's trash cans. They haven't barked or acted strangely, and my cats do like to tumble and play roughly with each other upstairs, causing the knocking sounds. The cleaning solution can be explained by my heavy-footed boyfriend walking by the refrigerator, and the bottle falling at the right angle to get a good distance. My boyfriend thinks he brought something or someone with him when he moved in. If he did, I don't think it's anything malicious. But with it being my birthday and being so close to Halloween, I am willing to conscript to the idea that it's my father, who passed when I was 7, wishing me a happy birthday. Or, as this is genuinely the happiest one I've had since passing 19 years ago. Or, it could just be the pregnancy brain making us go a little crazy during this time of year, and all of this is completely explained away. What do you think? I used to work at an old Soviet camp in rural Ukraine. It used to be a summer camp for children, and now its current owners are renovating it. Anyway, I worked installing heating in a smaller building, 400-ish meters away from the main facility. And to get there, you have to pass near a small silicate brick building. I don't know its purpose, but it's relevant. So one day in the middle of August, I was coming back from lunch break and was going towards that little building. It was painted white and had tiny square windows on each side of the door. It was square. Each wall was around 10 feet long and 7 feet high. As I came closer, I noticed something moving behind it. I was around 25 meters away from it, but I didn't pay much attention to it. I first thought it was merely a reflection of light because I have astigmatism. But I also had that same feeling when I encountered anything supernatural. As I came closer, what I saw made my skin crawl. It was a pallid blue girl's face staring at me with a toothy grin. It wasn't an illusion or a hallucination, and when I picked up the pace, its gaze followed me and the head turned. It looked almost normal, except for the stretched skin and uneven expression. I saw it very clearly. That girl looked like she had asphyxiated. After that, I heard screams varying in pitch when I passed that shed. I also saw red eyes staring at me from unlit rooms, and the perpetual feeling of being watched. It was wild. My intuition tells me that she is not the only ghost or entity here. I finished working at that camp a week ago, and sadly, I didn't have my phone at the time, so I don't have any pictures of that small building. My father and uncle have a story of living as outsiders, non-native, Caucasian, young people on the reservation. Their tale of experiencing a skinwalker. My grandma taught school on the reservation, and they lived well off compared to the natives living there. From what I know, there's a lot of lore surrounding the Navajo Nation. Non-natives, primarily older generations, keeping their experience and stories left unspoken, especially to those not from the culture. Forgive me if I'm mistaken in any of this, the culture, ideology, practices, or any other part. I'm just trying to tell the story my family has only spoken to me in whispers about. My grandmother, father, and uncle lived there for a few years, and their experience was much different than the Navajo people who have lived there for generations upon generations. I just want to tell their story and get insight as to anyone else who has lived in that community and any other stories some people might be willing to share. My father and uncle are about 2 years apart in age. They lived in Navajo Mountain in the 1980s. My dad was 10 to 12 and my uncle was younger. As it goes, they were always outside riding bikes with their friends, natives of the reservation. My grandma was recovering from an abusive relationship with their father and wasn't too concerned with their whereabouts, being it was a small community. There wasn't much trouble around, nor would they know what real trouble was at that age. Trouble wasn't the issue to young white boys on a reservation then. Pure terror was. It was a typical night without any parental supervision. The night was colder than usual, and the night sky was blacker than you could imagine. In such a desolate place, the stars in the sky would night the light. This night was as if the earth had moved to a different dimension, an abyss. The boys raced each other as they did every night, until they were compelled to force their brakes in unison. They simultaneously locked up. Each boy's face melted from carefree, innocent, and adolescent to unadulterated horror. The boys stood motionless, grasping their bikes with every nerve, muscle, and strength in their body on the dirt road. To the right of them was a mesa, one they rode by every day, the mesa that paralleled my family's home. The mesa that they could see through my father and uncle's bedroom every night. This mesa would become fear and nightmares to them from this night forward. At the top of the mesa was a roaring fire, taller than any bonfire that someone could assemble, bigger than a group of people could assemble. It raged and was unbelievable. It was almost as tall as the mesa itself. More unbelievable was the pitch-black figure seen cavorting around the bonfire. The native boys with my father and uncle informed them that as this was not a typical Navajo dance or ritual, pits began to form in their stomachs. Friends of my father and uncle turned back around without a word and bolted back to their homes. My father and uncle threw their bikes to the ground and ran across the unpaved road into their home. The two came back in a panic, relaying what they'd seen to my grandmother, but she was unconcerned. A legend of the natives, she told them, and shooed them away. They laid awake all night in their shared room, not saying a word to one another. They forced their curtains as close as possible, too scared to look out the window and see what they shouldn't have to begin with. Neither could shake the images burnt into their memory, but the sun managed to rise and peeked through to their room. A sense of release watched over them as the darkness had faded. The boys left their beds and travelled to the kitchen to try a second time to tell my grandmother what they saw that night. They tried to get a handle on what they saw, but it was as if they couldn't explain it. Again, my grandmother brushed them off, with a coffee and newspaper more important than their story. She told them to climb the mesa and investigate. The boys wrangled the friends who shared the experience with the night prior as they passed on their bikes. The friends stayed on the dirt road, looking up at the mesa as my father and uncle climbed up to see any evidence of the hell-burning fire they witnessed together. The mesa wasn't much taller than an average one-story house, so the brothers took less than 2 minutes to climb to the top where the nightmare took place. When they got to the top, they were hysterical and also relieved. There was no indication a bonfire of that enormity, or even a fire at all, had taken place on the mesa they had clearly seen the night earlier. They climbed down and told the message to the friends, who had also been part of the shocking scene. Their native friends looked at them in shock, but neither said a word to them. They immediately turned their bikes around and proceeded home. It was never talked about again, despite my father and brother asking about it. My grandmother and everyone else in the community refused to talk about it again. My father is a skeptic. He doesn't believe in anything paranormal. Aliens, ghosts, mermaids, you name it. But whenever I ask about the skinwalker he saw, he turns pale and white. He gets quiet, jumpy, and curt. I had to plead to get the full story out of him, and I could see goosebumps and every hair standing up on his arms when he shared this experience. My grandma took me to Navajo Mountain in 2019 to show me her history and to see how Navajo natives still live on this reservation today. According to her, not much has changed since living there in the 80s. I hiked and explored what I could of the reservation, so as not to invade or violate any of the Navajo reservation and its beauty. However, I did feel a change in mood when I visited. My existence felt heavy, as if I wasn't supposed to be there, or if I was invading territory that wasn't meant for me. Not caused by any of the community there, but just by my presence being on the land. I'll never forget my experience visiting and all that I learned about reservation life. I climbed the mesa where the skinwalker my dad and uncle had their ritual. I felt pretty normal until I got to the top and stood in the middle. I felt some darkness creep into me as I stood there. I've never been the same since. So about 3 months ago, I was on my way home from my second oldest son's house. It was late evening, but still daylight. The road that I was travelling was a state Route 2 lane. The area is rural, with a combination of cornfields and woods, with quite a few hilly areas. Traffic was fairly light. At one point, I came upon a fire truck blocking the roadway. The road was closed, so I turned around and, being familiar with the area, made my way around the closure and went on. I texted, let's just say someone that I know that's on the local sheriff's department, and asked what was going on with the road closed. Now, before he answered me back, I had an overwhelming feeling that hit me to stick around in the area. There's a cemetery close to that area that I go to quite often and record videos and audio, so that's where I started heading to. I then get the response. It's a fatal car crash with a car versus a truck. Head on. Female driver deceased, and she's from the area. After I pulled into the cemetery, I got another message. This one had 2 photos attached to it. I opened the attachments, and it was as horrible as I imagined it was. One photo was of her car, totally destroyed, sheets still covering the driver compartment, and there were 2 firefighters in the photo. One standing at the driver's door looking down into the car, and next to him was the medical examiner, I believe, who was also looking down into the driver area. The second firefighter was standing on the passenger side at the door. He too was staring down into the driver area. All 3 had a somber look on their face. The look made you think that they're thinking to themselves, what a shame, what a waste, too young. Now in the background of this photo was what you would expect to see. A fire truck, another emergency vehicle, and of course trees and so on. It's daylight with clear skies. Now, I had been given the deceased driver's name, because due to the career that I retired from, I had dealt with her on several occasions, and he knew that. He too had dealt with her a couple of times. Now, as I sat there in that cemetery looking at this photo, I kept getting that overwhelming feeling that I was missing something that was in the photo. And that inner voice, if you want to call it that, kept telling me to look again. Keep looking. So that's exactly what I did. I kept looking at it. Finally, something said enlarge it. Zoom in on the 2 at the driver's door. It was almost like something was begging me to keep looking and not to stop until I found it. So that's what I did. And then it was like a hammer hit me in the head. Every hair on my body stood on end all at once, and I gasped for breath of air, and I became physically sick to my stomach. As I stated, I knew this female, but it had been for a few years since I'd dealt with her. But there was no denying it. In that photograph of the crash scene, just behind the 2 EMS workers standing at the driver's door, was the face of the deceased driver. I couldn't believe what I was looking at, and for me, there was no denying that she was standing behind them, looking down into the driver's compartment. The look on her face was the look of complete and total shock. Like she was staring at her own body crumpled in the floorboard area, asking herself, why? What have I done? What about my daughter? She leaves a 5-year-old daughter behind. I took a screenshot of the enlarged photo to show the deputy. The following day, I went to see him and got the full story of what apparently took place before I showed him the screenshot. And the look on her face is explained more so when I heard what led to the crash. So I told him that I wanted him to look at the enlarged version of the photo I was sent. When I held it up for him to see, his face instantly, without hesitation, went white. Eyes opened wide and jaw dropped. He gasped for air and looked at me and said, "That's her." There's no way. That's not possible because she was dead when that was taken. Now, I have shown that photo to a limited number of people, just out of privacy for her and her family, but everyone that has seen it all have the same reaction and see her face instantly without being told what they're looking for or what they might see. In the photograph, her appearance is what looked like several years ago. Original hair colour and style. In the 23 plus years of my jobs, I've seen a lot of death. I've had people, including children, literally die in my arms, and I've handled a lot of crashes with fatalities where I took the photos, etc., and I've never had this happen. I had heard of it, but didn't really believe it could happen. Well, I'm no longer skeptical of this type of thing taking place, where death was instant and traumatic. In 2013, I was a freshman in college. There was always university stories with haunted dorms, rooms, or basements. So I never thought anything of it when I heard that our room, Rogers Hall, was very haunted. Within the first 3 weeks, 5 girls attempted to commit suicide by jumping off the building. Thankfully, they were unsuccessful. But it sure rocked us and made us start to believe that there may be an angry presence hanging around. One early morning, my roommate and I were asleep, and we always left the TV on, and we were in bunk beds. This is kind of important to the story, because normally my roommate couldn't get out of bed without waking me up. When I woke up, I didn't have my glasses on, but I could see a girl standing in front of our TV. She had medium brown hair and was wearing a grey sweatshirt and some jeans, and she looked like she was chewing on a sleeve. I immediately thought it was my roommate and rolled over to turn on my desk lamp and grab my glasses to ask her why she was up so early. When I flipped on the light and grabbed my glasses, she was gone, and I thought maybe my roommate went to the bathroom, so I got out of bed and looked up at her bed, and she was still sleeping. I shook her awake and asked her how she got up there so quickly, and she had no idea what I was talking about. The same day, maybe within a few hours, our friend that lived down the hall went to the communal bathroom and was washing her face. The door to the bathroom was very heavy and scraped the floor when you opened it. She said she heard someone open the bathroom door and she saw someone walk behind her. She didn't think anything of it because it was our floor bathroom and girls were waking up to get ready for classes. On one side of the bathroom, there were toilets, and on the other side of the bathroom, there were showers. But there were sinks and mirrors in the middle for both sides. Our friend was on the side of the showers. She said she saw the girl walk into the shower. As she was washing her face, she never heard the shower turn on, and she called over to her asking if everything was okay. She even walked over to see if the girl needed help, but there was no one there. Nothing ever happened again to either of us that year, but it still creeps me out. A lot of things went down in this house, but of all the spooky things that have happened to me there, this one crossed my mind after 18 years. I was 14 years old and living in Orange County with my 2 sisters and my mother. We had a rough upbringing, so renting an actual house was like a dream come true for us at that time, until we realised we were living in a haunted house. I was with my mom the day we rented. The garage was scary as hell, even in the daylight with people around. It just always gave me a clustered feeling of something being there I couldn't see. When the garage door was shut, it was pitch black. No light at all from outside could get through that garage door. During the summer, I would wake up early. I would listen to my CDs on my radio. I would clean my room, the kitchen and bathroom before I would ask my mom if I could meet my best friend at our halfway mark. This particular morning, the funky, spooky things in the house started early. As I walked out of my bedroom, shut my door, and walked down the hall, passing 2 bedrooms to the restroom, I noticed something from the corner of my eye in the kitchen, like a silhouette of a person that vanished. My mom's bedroom was directly outside the bathroom doorway to the right, and it had a private bathroom which led to the garage. Well, as I was walking out of the restroom, I saw a person walking into my mom's bedroom, like a woman. Thinking it was my mom, I was talking to her about leaving my friends, and the bedroom door shut on my face, and I was thinking, wow, she's rude today. So I opened the door, and again asked if I could go to my friends when a bathroom door started shutting. When I opened the bathroom door and said, Mom, I realised the garage door was wide open, and it was pitch black. At that moment, I knew it wasn't my mom, so I ran out, shut her bedroom door behind me, and started towards my bedroom, when I noticed my bedroom door was wide open. I was standing in my room confused and realised my radio was off. I tried turning it on multiple times and saw it was actually unplugged. I went to the living room to wake my mom up and asked if she had gone into my room to unplug my radio. She said she didn't ever go into my room or touch my radio that morning because she was still sleeping. I don't even know why I had to ask if she went into the garage through her bedroom for clarification. But needless to say, it wasn't her either. She asked me to please not leave her there alone, but I did, and still feel bad. Anyways, that night, I didn't want to come back home. I know whatever it was this time, it wanted me in that garage alone. Both me and my girlfriend were so excited to move in together. It was our first place, and we had high hopes. I remember the first time we stepped foot inside the apartment so vividly. I've never been one to believe in the supernatural, not a ghost, energy, spirit person. That all changed in the last year I spent in our apartment. I remember opening the door to the second floor apartments, walking up on a set of steps and turning onto the landing. As I reached the top of the second flight, I became instantly lightheaded, as if the air had become thinner and yet heavier at the same time. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. I struggle with anxiety and have never had the feeling that I did there anywhere else. Normal anxiety doesn't touch the feeling you have when you're in a space that just feels wrong. The first weeks living there, I felt anxious, as if my body was telling me to leave. I felt uncomfortable putting up a mirror in our living room. I had the strangest, unequivocal feeling of being scared to see something I didn't want to see in that mirror. There were constant foul smells and sounds lingering and moving through the space. I would feel drained the moment I stepped foot inside the place at the end of a day. Everything felt wrong. From the moment we moved in, the energy was off. All me and my girlfriend could do was fight with one another. We had never had any animosity in the way we did in that place. I truly have never felt less like myself. We would see things move in the peripherals and hear what sounded like another couple arguing coming over our events. I have more I could say, but I'm more curious if anyone has had a similar experience. Still processing everything, as I just moved out a little over a month ago. So I joined this server just to tell my experiences and see others. I've always been a fan of everything paranormal, but also keep lots of boundaries, trying to find explanations for everything that happened to me. Most times I can debunk it, or a lot of the time it's just me scaring myself. But anyways, enough rambling. My first experience was in my grandmother's house when I was only like 6. My mum's family is very aware of spirits, while my dad's side are more of the logical thinking people. So I've mainly been stuck in the middle. But this experience is my most unexplained one. It was late, probably midnight, and I was going to bed. So I get in bed and I start to feel scared. I get under the covers and stay for a minute until I look back up. There's a man standing in the doorway. Note, the bed was in the middle of the room, so this man started to walk to the side of the bed away from the door. So when I got my chance, I bolted out of the room to go get my grandma. The figure was full on white, a misty thing. And about a year later, I had the same thing tapping on my feet. Second experience is at my mom's current house. The house was built in 1931, and almost everyone who enters says it's haunted. As far as we know, we have 2 spirits. One of my uncles who used to live there, and my half-sister's dad, who every investigation he talks to us. He claims he follows my mom. My mom's current roommate also has seen a girl hanging in a mirror and his dead dog at the end of the bed. Maybe I'll send the images one day. My mom also has heard a girl laughing when she's the only girl in the home. My experiences there were the lights in the back room turning on and off, and kitchen cabinets that no one can reach, open and close on their own. Basic stuff. And the spirits don't seem to be evil, but the energy does. The farther you go north in the house, the more intense the energy. One time, just last week, I could barely breathe being in the back room. We realised there was a shift in energy right where the crawl space opening is. It's really intense because of the crawl space in and out of the house. We dropped a lighter by the crawl space and found it in the basement. Potential vortex? So my dad died 5 years ago. It was a freak car accident while he and my older brother were driving home from some sports event they'd gone to. My dad was larger than life in every sense of the word. He was 6 feet 8 inches tall, covered in tattoos, and had this laugh that I swear you could hear across the country. He and his twin brother, they were identical, played so many pranks on us while growing up that we sort of got used to it. That hasn't changed. Only now, dear Dad has the final laugh. The night of his funeral, my uncle and I were sitting together in the backyard. Uncle was telling stories about Dad and some of their wild teenage years, and I remember so badly wanting to hug my dad. All of a sudden, my uncle and I hear the unmistakable sound of my dad laughing, followed by the back door slamming shut. Uncle and I stared at each other, wide-eyed, and then burst into laughter. Because yeah, that's my dad for you. The door, in case you're wondering, turned out to be locked. From the inside. Uncle and I were the only ones home at the time outside of my Rottweiler, Beast, and it took an hour for us to find the spare key. He's continued to prank for us over the years. Our keys go missing, your phone will start blaring his favourite song at 3 in the morning, out of nowhere, or you'll wake up to the sound of my dog growling that distinctive rotty rumble that he only ever used while playing with my dad. His laughter is always heard, as well as the scent of Old Spice, his favourite cologne. We miss him every day, but he always manages to remind us that he gets the last laugh nowadays. Almost 30 years ago, I was spending several months in Western Europe and staying at a former monastery built in the 17th century. Very early on during my stay, I was warned by one of the girls who worked there to stay away from certain areas of the building, or at least not to go there by myself. When I asked why, she said none of them ever went there alone, because often they would see black figures staring at them from the end of the hallway. While I've always loved ghost stories, I had never seen one and wasn't too bothered by what she told me. In fact, I actually wanted to go to that area to see if I could catch something. Spoiler alert, I never saw anything there or anywhere else in the building, but that didn't mean nothing happened. I spent several months there, but it was only after I left that I started to realise something was wrong with that place. Many things happened there, but if we're to tell them all would end up with a book. You see, I changed while I was there. I started hearing my name being called constantly by a voice I didn't recognise. Not only that, I couldn't even tell if it was male or female. Nothing else was said, only my name was called. I looked around but couldn't see anyone. Oftentimes, I would hear people playing billiards and I would head out to where the billiards table was, only to find the room deserted and the balls put away so nobody could have been playing. As soon as I walked away, I would almost immediately hear the sound of play, which I knew couldn't be because I had just been there seconds before. Funny thing is that at the time, I didn't think anything of it. Not of my name being called, not of the phantom billiards game. The attic of this building was huge, and it had been turned into a library. There was brand new heating and heavy new insulation installed. I'd go there to get away from people and to read. At first, there was nothing unusual, and I could be there for hours with nobody else bothering me, but soon that would change. I started feeling as if someone was standing behind me, but I looked everywhere, and nobody was there. Soon, I started hearing strange knocking noises behind me, and the room became so cold that I could see my own breath steaming. I checked the heat, and it was fine, but I felt more and more uncomfortable there. I felt unwelcome, but I still went there until one day, when I went up the stairs and even thought it was open. I was unable to pass the threshold. There was nothing blocking my way, and yet I couldn't pass no matter how hard I pushed. I tried for about 10 minutes and finally gave up. I never went into the attic again. Weird thing about it is that it was the one place where I never heard my name being called. I could probably write a book with everything else that happened, but this has taken long enough already. The thing is, I never wanted to leave. I left that place 30 years ago, and although I don't hear my name being called, I know it wants me to go back. It just sits there, waiting. This happened a few years ago, and I feel like it's time to share it. I've been dating my ex-wife a while, and we lived in the basement of a small apartment that she owned. She had left to take her cousin home while I stayed with her son. He was asleep, and I was in the living room. I got this sudden cold chill. I heard from the bedroom a voice that said, "Come here." Now I thought, okay, maybe it's from outside or even upstairs from another person. Creepy, but whatever, right? Then I heard a woman's voice say my name and ask me to come here. She says it's okay, that she won't hurt me. Scared the crap out of me. I go on the porch and leave the door open so I can hear her son if he wakes up. Yes, I left him in bed while I was hearing voices coming from the bedroom. Not my finest moment, I know. When my girlfriend came back, I told her what happened and she told me she'd heard voices before and it was fine. Next one, we were all asleep and her son woke up crying. I started to get up to get him a bottle when I saw her by his crib and she said not to worry about it. She's got it and to go back to sleep. I crawled back in bed and cuddled back with her and fall asleep, not realizing that she was in two places at once. Next day it clicked and I asked her if she got up to get her son a bottle. She said no, and that's when I figured out that she was in bed when I got up. Last one was 2 months before we got married. Same building, but this time her younger sister stayed the night. Next day she went to church and left the two of us there alone. She was 12 and I was 22. We were talking about ghosts and stuff, and she was telling me stories that she experienced. My girlfriend later admitted that the stories were all true. But back to that day, as I was shaving, she was sitting on the bed talking about a ghost when she looked at me and screamed. I turned around and she said there was someone that was right behind me. Of course, I didn't see it, but I believed her as I could see her from the mirror and I saw the terror on her face. When we went back to the bedroom, my girlfriend's CD collection had been moved. One in particular was pushed out like it had wanted to be seen. It was the single of The Invisible Man by 98 Degrees. These all happened in 1999. I have a few more, but I wanted to share these first. I knew something was off. Whenever I was in a room alone, especially with my back to the entrance, I felt as if I wasn't alone. And whatever it was didn't seem to be looking for a friend, more a victim. I never felt this when it was anywhere but home, but it was still horrifying for any 7-year-old. In my bedroom one day, I was with my sister, and we were sitting on my bed playing Connect 4. I had just won when we heard a knock on my door, a solid knock from the knuckles. So I stood up and opened the door, and I didn't see my parents. We had cats, but they didn't knock. I know what scratching at the door sounded like. We walked over to my parents' bedroom. Their door was closed. We knocked and explained what happened. They were confused and explained how they were in there the whole time and didn't knock. We all brushed it off as a one-time odd occurrence, not thinking much of it. Looking back now, that's where we went wrong. A couple months later, I was in the basement with my sister, who was in the area off to the side, out of the way, and I was in the main area. The staircase was in the centre, surrounded by drywall, and the other side was the workshop. So I was riding my scooter around the staircase, through the workshop, into the main area. One of these laps I saw just 3 heads floating in the workshop in a line. I don't remember the faces, but they were all that of a man's head. They weren't moving up or down, just facing forward all the same direction, towards the staircase. I stopped as I was confused. I didn't see how they could be there, and they weren't there the next lap. I found my parents and explained this to them. They were just as confused as I was. We didn't know what to do. I was only 7 or 8, so I'm not exactly what you'd call a reliable source. We didn't do anything because we couldn't. Fast forward another few months, and I'm in the shower rinsing my hair. We had a mirror on the wall in the shower, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and looked at the mirror directly. I saw a black figure emerging from the wall, just the shape of a torso and an arm extended at my left shoulder, about to make eye contact with me. Then it vanished, and I heard a loud drop of water, like a water bottle worth of water had fallen into a bucket. But the only place there could be a bucket that I'd hear and not see is the closet behind the bathroom and in front of my room. But the closet is full and no room for a bucket. I step out of the shower, terrified without even bothering to dry off. I step out of the bathroom and tell my parents, who were sitting in the room next to the bathroom, what had happened. I was shaking and cold and could barely get a word out. My dad sat in the bathroom as I finished my shower. That was the last shower I'd ever taken in that bathroom. At this point, my mom admitted she felt like she was being watched too, when she was working. She worked at home from the basement. Fast forward to about a couple of years back. My parents have a friend who knew about this, and she supposedly knows about the paranormal activity, and she said she felt a presence. Not a good one. We also found a Ouija board from my mom's parents. None of us ever touched it. We gave it to the same friend who knew what to do with it. Another year or so passed, and we were talking with a family friend. My dad met him from work, then he quit and became a nurse. He quit being an RN and became a priest. So, we had him bless our house and especially where everything happened. None of us have had an experience like this since. I do occasionally feel like I'm being watched, but a much weaker feeling. I told this story to some people from my BSA troop while sitting around a fire one night. One kid said he didn't sleep that night when he talked to me the day after. So I was never really big into the supernatural thing, and to this day, I'm rather doubtful of it all. However, one thing I still cannot explain, even after years, was something that happened to me as a child. I was listening to the TV downstairs as I went to fill up my glass of water, and didn't think too much about it, since my parents often fall asleep in front of the TV. However, as I went to check on them, there was absolutely no one in the room, and the TV was turned off. Okay, I thought, and was just slightly confused, but still returned to bed. The next morning, I woke up in an unfamiliar place, and it was in the TV room, in front of the TV. Now that really freaked me out, and my parents suggested they lock the doors at night, since they took me for a sleepwalker. In the coming weeks, I regularly heard the TV noises, especially around midnight, even when I was 100% sure my parents were in their bedroom. But after that incident, I never checked that room again, and generally avoided the lower floor at night. I moved out years ago and asked my parents about it, but they didn't know anything about the TV running at night. Weird, right? Well, I visited last week and was watching TV in the middle of the night. Turned it off to go to bed, and wouldn't you know it, it fucking turned on again after I turned it off. No touching the remote or anything, just jumped back alive. Well, I turned it off again and got the fuck out of there. Went to bed and woke up in the same chair as when I was a child the next morning, right where I sat when I was watching TV the night before. So I guess I'm not too keen to visit again. I'm a student. I'm not very athletic, nor am I in any way sporty, but rather more of an academic. So when we had sports day qualifications at school for the first time in 3 years, I was forced to truly exert myself, and I was fortunately able to win first place in the 100-meter sprint and qualify. I was quite proud of my victory, but hated it just as much. I should have prepared beforehand by doing some stretches or warming up, because the next day my body ached a lot. Despite the physical discomfort, I went to school, which was actually a lot of fun, but we were forced to end the day with a practice march, past for the actual sports day next week. Which would have been fine had it not been 32 degrees Celsius, and if my body hadn't been aching. And in retrospect, I realised my throat felt somewhat constricted, and I had some trouble swallowing. After school, I went for tuition, which wasn't so bad, because I went in my friend's car, and I was able to sit down during it, and I was able to find a taxi relatively easily. As soon as I got home, my father started getting ready to leave for the hospital for an appointment, and my mother was already home at the time visiting her sickly mother. However, I wasn't alone at home. I had 3 cats. My only complaint was that it was loud because my neighbours who lived directly above my house were renovating. However, all sounds ceased at around 7 or so, and that's when things started to get weird. I was studying when I noticed I was feeling warm, so I went into my parents' room and got a thermometer to check my temperature, which read 100.7 Fahrenheit. I did tell my parents because they had their own problems, and instead decided to finish the chapter I was revising and then go to sleep. And I had just sat down when I heard a peculiar sound. Before I go on, I must confess I am a fan of short horror stories, and being alone in the house at 7:30 in the evening, my mind began to wander, and I entertained the idea of a ghost. Despite this, I am a realist, and instead tried to figure out what made the sound. It couldn't have been the construction workers doing renovations, but it could have been my cats. Still, it was a peculiar sound. It sounded like someone was tapping with their fingernail against wood, with their pace increasing with each tap. I was sitting at a wooden desk at the time, and I almost recreated the sound, and a few seconds after I did, I heard the sound again, slightly louder than the one I made. For the second time, I recreated the sound. This time what I heard was different. Instead, there were two taps, maybe 5 seconds apart. My mind began to race as I tried to consider each possibility, but my churning grey matter formed a horrible thought. I was hearing the sounds coming from what sounded like my parents' bedroom. In it, the only wood was the bed frame, a table, a display case, and their cupboards, which were up against the wall, separating our rooms. They were made of wood. I stopped echoing the sounds, and when I did, or rather didn't, they stopped. But when I wanted to test, to see whether or not what I was hearing was still there, and so I tapped, recreating the first sound, to which I was met with the creepiest of all the sounds I had heard that night. It was like somebody was rolling marbles against the cupboards. I immediately covered my eyes and began to recite what I was studying mentally whilst I was doing this. There were more sounds, like another tapping, but this one sounded deeper. Eventually, the sound ceased, and I opened my eyes and began to look around my room for my cats. One of them was on my bed, the second was somewhere around the house, and the third, who was blind in one eye, was sitting at my door, looking in the direction of my parents' room. It was only when I saw the third that I realised she was meowing more than usual that night, despite her food and water bowls being full. My mother came home soon after that and went into her room, in which I followed her, noticing the third cat laying down in the hall. In her room, I saw a pet toy. It was plastic, with a smaller plastic ball in it, which made a sound when you shook. So I thought I had found the source of my sound. However, as I was writing this, I began to realise that certain details do not add up. The toy was on the bed, not on the floor, which wasn't wood, and even if it was the ball, I doubt the cat could create the same sound twice and within the same toy, an even deeper sound, and the sound of rolling marbles. This all happened when I was 6 years old, and I still remember it so vividly. Just to preface, I'm open to the idea of the paranormal, but for the most part, I'm still a skeptic. I'm one of those, I wouldn't be surprised if ghosts really existed, but for now, I don't think they do, sort of people. I believe there is an explanation for any paranormal experience we face, whether it's simple or complicated. My parents had emigrated from Vietnam in the 80s and did the whole Ellis Island immigration process. They have lived all over the country, but fast forward to 1993, when they had me in California. In 1999, my family was pretty poor and decided that we wanted to try and get a place with my cousin's family. They went searching for a house in Sacramento, California. They found a place that was oddly cheap. If I can recall correctly, it was a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house with a gated automatic fence and a decently sized lot. Now here are the details that were told to me later in life, when I got older and spoke to my parents about the house. There was obviously a catch to the low price point to this house. The offering price was due to the fact that it was known to be haunted. The real estate agent was very upfront about this and mentioned the history of the house. The original owner of the home died in the nursery of the house. The nursery was located underneath the stairs. We're unsure of what the owner died from, but my parents didn't think that was necessary to know or even remember. My dad and his brother were skeptics at the time and were only interested in the price point. The real estate agent mentioned that there have been many families that lived here that experienced paranormal activity and moved out fairly quickly. This did not stop them from taking the offer. There were many things that we experienced in this house, some very typical, such as creaky pipes and wood, extreme sudden cold temperatures, footsteps, etc. However, I'd like to share what I deem to be the creepiest moments. Although it was a 5-bedroom house, we had to share rooms due to 2 families living in the house. I shared a room with 2 of my cousins, both around my age. One of the nights I remembered, this was a couple weeks living here, and we were already experiencing creepy things. I really needed a drink of water. We had a pact that if we ever went somewhere in the middle of the night, we would wake each other up and go together. So I woke up my cousins and told them to come with me to get a drink of water really quickly. We had an uncle that stayed with us at the time, that would stay anywhere he possibly could. Well, he didn't mind taking the nursery. Obviously, when we were kids, our parents didn't inform us of any of the paranormal talk they had. All of our experiences were discovered on our own. So as we walked down the stairs, we could hear our uncle groaning in his sleep, almost as though he was in pain. We sat on the stairs and continued to listen, and we were trying to make out what he was trying to say. We noticed the name Sam kept coming up. We got our water and went back to sleep. The next day, we brought up what we heard. Uncle said to our parents and told them to keep saying the name Sam. My parents looked at us in terror. They then tried to play it off and said it was nothing of concern. We were kids, but we definitely knew they were hiding something from us, but we moved on from it. When we were older and talked about this incident, our parents finally told us the truth. Apparently Sam is the name of the original owner that passed away in that nursery. They had not all informed my uncle about the name of the owner. They confronted my uncle, and he had no idea what they were even talking about. This sent chills up my spine, even so many years after the experience. Here's the last experience that was pretty much the, okay, we're moving motive. After maybe 4 or 5 months, we had a Lunar New Year's party. Typically these drinking parties will go on all night, and it usually ends up in a mellow, talk to each other in the living room gathering to end the night sort of thing. It was probably 1 AM at this point, and the people that were left were all in the living room at the base of the stairs. Everyone was pretty much accounted for. As the night was dying down, everyone was chatting, and suddenly we heard doors and maybe windows start to slam shut upstairs, one by one. This lasted maybe 10 seconds. It almost didn't sound real, because it seemed like there were more doors and windows shutting than we even had. Silence, as we all stopped and stared at the top of the stairs, terrified. My dad and brother started to walk up the stairs, and some of us crept behind them. They called out to see if anyone was up there, and had no response. Here's the scary part. Every single door was open. There wasn't a single door that was actually slammed shut after all. Yet we all heard the doors shut, one after the other. I remember so vividly crying my eyes out when my uncle came back and said, all the doors are open. We moved out within a week. My parents never shared with me the address of that place. They never wanted me to look it up any further. I don't blame them. However, I'd be really interested in looking up more of the history of the house. I've tried Googling things such as Sam Sacramento Haunted House, but found nothing. I remember what that house looks like, but as extensively as I've tried to search it up, I can't find it. While working as a night dispatcher for an alarm company, I received a frantic call one midnight. It was a janitor from an elementary school we monitor. We spoke often. With a trembling voice, she asked us to send the police. An intruder was in the school. This woman was hysterical. My partner called the police as I stayed on the line with her. I asked for a description of the intruder and where she was for the police. She replied, I'm hiding under a desk in the main office. This was serious. In my 7 years as a dispatcher, I handled bank robberies, guns to the face, break-ins, arsons, etc. I never heard anyone so scared. After calming her down, I asked her what happened. This was her reply. She was done for the night, alone in the building with all doors and classrooms locked. She was gathering her things ready to exit and set the alarm. The building was silent. Strangely, she heard a metal garbage can rattling. She looked to see a young red-haired woman standing over a garbage can looking at her. She was wearing a dress, pumps, a coat with a fur collar, and looked sad. Her clothes seemed old-fashioned. My janitor friend said to the woman, Excuse me, but the school is closed. You must leave. The red-haired lady calmly turned down the hallway without saying anything. The janitor followed close behind, wondering who she was and how she got in. As she turned the corner, expecting to see the trespasser down the long corridor, nobody was there. She checked all the doors along the corridor all the way to the exit, and all doors were locked. Not to mention there was no sound of any door being opened in the quiet building. Fear set in, and she ran to call me. The janitor began to cry and said, "Please hurry the police." I said, "She wasn't there." She replied through tears, "There was nowhere for her to go. I turned the corner and she was just gone." She seemed in shock or denial. The police notified us they were outside. All doors were locked along the outside perimeter, and they wanted in. This poor, terrified janitor didn't want to leave the office. I convinced her to let the officers in. They did a thorough search and found no signs of entry or anyone. No one was observed in the vicinity. The janitor quit and never called me again. This was 25 years ago, and there were no cameras monitoring the school at the time. To start, this is a true story. My family and I moved from SoCal to Mexico in 2007, and we were accompanied by two of my parents' friends along the way. My parents built a 3-story house there, so we all had a room. Parents, their friends from Cali, and my aunt who stayed in another room. Despite all those people in the house, I felt something was off. They told me that I was adjusting, and they still hadn't called the priest to bless the house. And that was when we would all feel better. Anyway, bedtime came and my brother and I decided to sleep in my parents' bedroom the first night. So since it's a big master bedroom, we placed our sleeping bags on the floor and called it a day. So there I am waiting to fall asleep when I start feeling the room go cold. I thought nothing of it, but then I started feeling very scared for no reason. I did what we all do at that age and wrapped myself in a blanket. I thought it was all in my head, but then I heard a dog breathing close to my ear, and I knew that my brother was around the other side, so it wasn't him. I was really scared now, but I also feared for my family since they were all asleep. In an act of desperation and fear, I got up only to find nothing was there. I woke my dad up and told him what happened. He just thought I was exaggerating and told me to pray and sleep. This time I slept a little closer to them, and right when I was about to sleep, a solid steel door we have at our entrance slammed so hard, everyone jumped and woke up. There was no wind at all, and nobody could explain how it opened without the key. They all started talking, and then they looked at me and told me to go to sleep, so I left. I woke up the next morning, and as I was making my cereal bowl, my mom asked me what was it I saw or heard. I told her, and she just went pale. She said my aunt and our 2 guests saw a woman in white walk down the stairs. Moments later, the door slammed shut, and 7 people can't be wrong. This was one of the many things to happen in our house. I used to live in a home that was old. This house backed up to the woods, lake, and other places to explore as a little kid. Everything was there for a kid, anything you could ask for. But there was one thing that bothered me the most, the secret door in my room. I'm going to try and paint a picture for you. There was a white picket fence that you would walk into. After opening the door, you would head into the main entrance. Looking inside the house from the main door, you would see a staircase that was going upstairs in front of you. Walk upstairs, and there'd be the split, left to right. Guest room 1, bathroom, guest room 2, guest room 3. I grew up in the 3rd room. Inside this room, it was stained wood everywhere. Ceiling, wall, and floor. There were 2 windows. Everything creaked and made a sound. You knew exactly where to walk without making a sound. One thing in this room bothered me. There was a closet with shelves. You had to open this door to see it. Under the bottom, there was a loose fitting board. If you moved it, there was a hole. Inside this hole was a crawl space, and a lot of it. Apparently, the parents found notes inside this crawl space and told me nothing about it until I was older. They just said, "We found notes." This creeps me out just typing this. I can feel my hair standing up. When I was younger, I felt my bed shake. I hardly slept because my bed was shaking at times. All I could think about was the door in my room. Keep in mind, this whole room was wood everywhere. It was the only room like that in the house. I would have dreams, and horrible dreams. One night, I would have had a dream of the door opening, and I was lifted off the bed. There was a black cloud and red eyes watching me. This cloud would bring me outside my room. I would try and run down the stairs, but was thrown back up the stairs, all in slow motion. Once I woke up, the bed was shaking. Not from me shaking the bed. A wooden bed was shaking in a wooden room. It was a horrible sound. This happened over and over. To this day, I don't like talking about it. I do not believe in ghosts, but I think back to this moment and question everything sometimes. Whatever was in that room didn't want me there. I'm glad to be out of it.